Hello everybody and welcome back to this video. So today we are going to talk a little bit about Spring Native support in Spring.3.0 milestone 5. There are already two other videos on my channel about how to set up Spring.3.0 in general. I will give you the link in the description as well as Spring Native. But today we are going to take a look at Spring.3.0 for milestone 5 and what has changed and improved for Spring Native, and also what still needs to be done. However, RC1, so release candidate 1, is already on the horizon for next week. So I think things will improve. And there is also a video by the Spring people that already explain a lot concerning the state of Spring Native. However, these are just very small standard examples. And in this video, I also want to give you some examples for RabbitMQ, for Spring Batch, for accessing the database, and much more stuff than that. So without further ado, let's dive in. So today we're going to start with a RabbitMQ application. I start this application and then let's take a look what it's currently doing. So we go to localhost 50,500, and what we can do, we can create some events. For example, create patient, update patient, create practitioner, and whatnot. And what it's doing in the background, it creates events via RabbitMQ and catches these events in the same application. So there are some adapters here that react to a Rabbit listener, and this is working. This has, of course, this is working in non-native mode, and it has been working with Spring.2.0 in the past with Spring Native. But for 3.0, we need to do some additional changes here, and I will walk you through what needs to be done and also give you a little bit of a guide what you can do if you run into some troubles here. Let's stop this for now because we need to take a look at the basic setup. So to get native images running in 3.0, we currently need Cradle. There is a Maven plugin, but I was not able to get that running. So we specifically need Cradle. There's also another video on my channel if you want to know more about Cradle, but it's not too complicated to set up. If you use something like IntelliJ, it will automatically ask you if you want to have Cradle. It will download Cradle for you, and then you can just work right away. What you need then is a plugin, and you need the so-called GraalVM built to its native plugin. This is not by the Spring people itself, but Spring will pick it up and it will then do the so-called AOT processing, which is necessary for building native images. Okay, this is mandatory. You also need to have GraalVM installed. So we are not doing a container build here, which we did in the past. So you need to have GraalVM installed locally. And there is, however, an option to build a container with a native image. It's not here, but it's not working currently in a good way. Okay, so this is basically all we need. What is very important that we have this version here, version 0.14. I was using this version before, and with that, we got different worse results for our native images. With this, what you then basically need to do on the command line, you can then do, you can call this native compile application, or you can just say Cradle v clean native compile, and this will trigger a native compile. I won't do this because this will take a lot of resources away, and then afterwards we'll just start the application. However, if you will do this with standard RabbitMQ application 3.0, you will run into this error. After bootstrapping the application, it will give you no such method exception. And the question is now, what can we do to remedy this, and what does it mean? So this basically means we already see here, we have this get constructor here and get declared constructor. That means that reflection is used in the background. And reflection is nothing that AOT can do for us automatically. So we need to set some hints. For this, we go into an application class, and in the past, there were these things like type hints, which were annotations, but this has changed now. So from now on, we can do this programmatically. So what we need to do, we have to say import runtime hints and give an application class here. So this is a static class here. You can also move this to a public class if you don't want to have static classes. But if we are going this way with a static class, we have this application runtime hints that needs to implement from this runtime hints registrar. And this has one method that is called register hints. What we do in register hints here is we say hints reflection, we register a type, and we just take the one from our error, which should be rabbit health indicator. And then we just say invoke declared constructor and invoke declared methods. What we see here, get constructor, this means that basically a constructor is called via reflection. So it might be enough to do just this. But this is somehow more the brute force method. So whenever you run into some troubles and you don't know what's going on here, if you do a native compile, this is the brute force method that works at least in 70% of the example. So basically it opens all the constructors and all the methods for reflection. And this is one of the most common things you need to do if you run into an error. If this is done, your native application should run right away. So I start the standard application here and it will work. It will work just fine and there will be no crash. So we can take a short look into the class, so what it's done here in the background, Spring is somehow instantiating this constructor here, and this needs to be open for reflection. And what it does is basically our hint will just go to some files that are generated during the compilation process. So in build generated AOT resources, we have several files here, and we have this reflect config JSON. And what it does is basically we get an entry here with rabbit health indicator, all declared methods, all declared constructors true, which will open all methods and all constructors for reflection. And this is basically what this is doing here. So this will just take care that we have this reflection JSON with these entries, and this can be picked up later by the GraalVM process, because Spring No is doing nothing for the GraalVM native compile itself, but only preparing these JSON files. But only there is another video. This is much more complicated, because Spring already is trying to improve on that you have for all standard use cases that these JSON files are complete, but it can always happen that there needs to be another hint, and that's what we are basically doing here. Okay, that's so much for this application. Let's take a look at the next one. So our next application is more standard application. That's a standard REST service, a RabbitMQ here. We can start this. Again, we need Gradle to compile this thing. So we go now to localhost 50,900, and there we have standard application. So nothing special here. A REST application will work by itself without any hints. However, we have two additional things here. We have an aspect that what we see here, it will every time we call an application, and it will log the user. It will also log how much time it's using. And we also have an exception handler here. If we break something, so I will, for example, have an invalid request param, we will get a custom exception handler method here. These two things are indicated again via an aspect and via this around advice. And for the exception handler, we have a so-called controller advice. while these things in Spring 2 native worked, they are currently not working out of the box with milestone 5 for 3.0. They are basically not working. There is no error, but they are doing nothing. What we need to do here, funny enough, is basically what we did with the last example. So we just need to register the type for reflection. So our duration logger, our exception handler, again, brute force, constructor, declared methods, and then it works. And that's mostly it for that application. So our next application is a so-called frozen service. That's a more complete application. So this is accessing the database. This is also doing some auditing in the background where we need some additional things to be set up. And it can also do a REST call to another service. Okay, let's take a look what's needed for now to get this thing working. So first and foremost, of course, we again have our logger and exception handler with our declared constructors and declared methods. Then additionally, whenever we do a REST call, but that was already the same for version 2 of Spring Boot. So if you do something like this, REST template get for object, blah, 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 and a POJO like a callee is returned, we need to register this for reflection. Again, declared constructors, declared methods, brute force, this will always work. Additionally, we need this so-called simple client HTTP request factory. I think this will go away with the release candidate because that's more of an internal thing. So if we set a timeout, this also needs to be registered for reflection. And then if we write things into the database with something like bean property SQL parameter source only for these use cases, this is internally also using reflection, and this is used for an audit event. We also need to do this. Again, same old story, constructors, methods will work. What is also inside here is that we have some handling for multi-tenancy, and in the background, we automatically get a tenant ID that's added, and we are leveraging a so-called statement inspector from Hibernate for this. I do not remember if there was an exception or if it did not work, but again, same old story, constructors, methods, and it will work afterwards. The only additional thing that we now will have is during bootstrapping of the application, it will create the database, and this is currently done by an init script of Spring because Flyway is still not working with Spring Native. I had some efforts trying to get it running with version 2. But it's not officially supported. So we have to go with the old route here, like SQL init schema locations. And then we have the next trouble. This is a class path resource, and currently class path resources need to be registered manually for 3.0. I hope this will change, but currently it is like it is, but it's honestly very simple. For this, we say hints resources register pattern, and we then just can say, that's the wrong one. It has to be DB migration, by the way. And then DB migration.sql. And then it's possible that it can load this SQL file and create the database. Okay, now to the last one. So our last application is a Spring Batch application, standard Spring Batch application, which is importing person and toys from the resources. So there are 2 CSV files here that contain data that are imported and written to the database. For Spring Batch, honestly, we need to do a lot more currently. I hope this will be remedied in the final release candidate next week. So what we need is first, this is what we also needed for version 2 of Spring. We need to register the types that are written to the database. So we have an item writer here that writes either persons or we have one for toys, and these need to be registered. Again, constructors, methods will work. Additionally now, and that was the error I had in the other part earlier today. We need to register again our DB migrations, and then also all the CSV data that is read from the class path, because out of the box, CraalVM knows nothing about resources here. So we just can say register pattern with a star here, and then all the catalog data and all the migrations will be loaded. Next up, the next problem was that internally it was trying to access this Java SQL types via reflection here. That's a little bit of a different story. This is not using constructor or method via reflection. It was trying to read the fields from this guy here. That was a little bit more complex to find out. For this, we can just use hints.reflection.register field, and it will register all the fields for reflection. And then, final problem, when we started the application, it gave us an error like this. This is also something that could happen on a regular basis, especially if things are not already set up in Spring. So this gave us an exception about unsupported feature, proxy classes defined by interfaces, Job Explorer, interfaces, and then the list of interfaces, a lot of interfaces. So honestly, until this day, this error message was very confusing for me. What you need to do, and you need this to do 2 times, one for the item processor and one for the Job Explorer, is to register a JDK proxy. But the message, the error, is a little bit confusing. So what you just need to do is, in our example for the item processor, that's implemented by our person item processor and by our toy item processor, is, you see, the implementations like person or toy item processor are not here. It's basically just what the error is giving us. Please register all of the types, all of the interfaces. And this is basically what you need to do. You have to register all of the interfaces, not the implementation, all of the interfaces. If you are still missing one, like I was missing the serializable, it will give you the same error. So this is basically what you then have to do. For a specific part, like this time is what is the item processor, register all of them. And also for the Job Explorer, you need to do this. Here we can use a convenience method, because if you use this complete JDK proxy interfaces, which was recommended by this method here, it's enough. So what this is basically doing, it's adding Spring Proxy, advised, and decorating proxy, and returning the class itself. However, for the item processor, this was not enough because we also need these 3 things additionally. But that's it concerning this. If you run into an error like this, just remember to register all of the interfaces the error will spit out, and that's it. And with all of this, Spring Batch will now also work, but again, I think that this will be fixed in the upcoming release candidate 1 or the final version. So that's mostly it for today. 2 things to add. One thing I wasn't able to get working was the Open API. I think the guy is already working on this for Spring Native, so it does not make a lot of sense to do this on my own. And the other thing was Elasticsearch. I put a lot of hints in there, but I finally gave up because it was just too much. And I also expect that to work with the final versions of Spring, either release candidate or the final version. Okay, so that's it for today. Thank you so much, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.